The following is Orage's commentary on Beelzebub, and this is from Teachings of Gurdjieff, a Pupil's Journal by C.S. Knott. We returned to New York towards the end of 1927 and resumed our work with the group. During the winter, Orage reviewed our study of Beelzebub's tales of the past 3 years. I made copious notes of his talks and collected and collated notes and fragments from others. Later, when Orage came to London to live, I discussed the material with him over a period of 3 or 4 years and revised it. The following commentary, compiled from hundreds of pages of notes, is but a small portion of them. Although I have tried to put the notes in sequential form, they are not strictly chronological. At various times he referred to the same passages, often from different viewpoints, hence there will be some repetition, and although some of the notes may appear fragmentary, everything is connected. Orage said, "Some of you still criticize the faulty grammar and punctuation and ask why I do not do something about it. Well, although from the first writing the sense is in each chapter, Gurdjieff is constantly rewriting and revising. As you may know, he writes in pencil in Armenian. This is translated into Russian and then into literal English by Russians. It is then gone over by 1 or 2 English and American pupils at the Prairie who have only a rough knowledge of the use of words. All I can do at present is to revise the English when it obscures the sense. Although I've talked over the chapters with Gurdjieff and discussed the sense of them, he will never explain the meaning of anything. His task is to write the book, ours to make the effort to understand. The style and sense are Gurdjieff's. The surprising thing is that, in spite of the difficulties of translation, the sense and style come through so well. It can be said that in English, this being a more flexible language than French, it is possible to play with words so that the English translation will have a quality of its own. Orage cautioned us about attempting to explain to new pupils the meaning, as we understood it, of things in Beelzebub. One could only throw out hints. With those on the same level of understanding as oneself, discussion was useful. In the weeks that followed, we reviewed the chapters, we on our side striving to contribute. And since we were all more or less on the same level of understanding, the talks were very helpful indeed. What follows of his commentary is only an outline, so to say, of Beelzebub's tales to Hussein, hints at the richness and depth of the wisdom. Each reader will understand according to his own inner development. At first it is like a bud, then it opens out like a flower. The preface to the book, Orage said, is what an overture is to an opera. The ideas to be developed are indicated lightly. They are expressed, not by direct statement, but by parable. The preface is called The Arousing of Thought. The book opens with an invocation to all 3 centres, to wholeness, but especially to the Holy Ghost. The book is to be read from the real heart, that is, with emotional understanding. Normal people will begin any serious venture in an attitude of wholeness, but on this remote lunatic planet we never do, but only partially. Gurdjieff places his hand on his heart, that is, his solar plexus, which to us is heart, since we have no Holy Ghost, no neutralizing force, since we are third force blind. He has no wish to write. He compels himself to write by will, which is indifferent to personal inclination, and this is the attitude in which each one of us ought to approach the method. The book is an objective work of art. Objective art consists of conscious variations from the original according to the plan of the artist or writer who strives to create a definite impression on his audience. The art we know is as natural as the song or the nest of a bird. The nest of the oriole seems more perfect to us than the nest of the snipe, but we attribute no conscious value to the bird. So with John Milton and Michelangelo. Milton sang but as the linnet sings. Gurdjieff will not use the language of the intelligentsia. Ideas in the book will not be presented in our habitual thought patterns. Our intellectual life is based on charge associations which have become more or less fixed. Only when these are broken up can we begin to think freely. Our associations are mechanical. A whole mood can be destroyed by the use of one word which has a different group of associations. In a serious discussion, for example, an unthinking person, by letting drop a vulgar word, can destroy the mood of that group. Gurdjieff asks, "What language shall I write in?" He has begun in Russian, but cannot go far in that, for Russian is a mixture of essence and personality. Russians will philosophize for a short time, then drop into gossip, into yarns. English is useful for practical matters, but inadequate for meditation and pondering on the whole. The psychology of the Russians and the English is like sol y anka, a stew in which there is everything except the essential you and the real I. They cannot tell the truth about themselves. Armenian is essence, the Armenian of our childhood, when we spoke from essence. As we grew up, we learnt Russian and English. But one cannot express modern ideas in the language of essence. There remains Greek, but again Greek of today is not like the Greek of one's childhood. As one grows up, one's behaviour is different. To a conscious person, behaviour is a language. Many of the books that are written, even literary ones, are manifestations of a pathological state. There is, for example, the cancerous style, the tubercular style, the syphilitic style. Can you, as literary critics, tell the difference between a style which is only words and a style which is words plus content? The Song of Deborah in the Old Testament is an example of the latter, but this, though written out of the fullness of her heart, is still not objective art, because its content depends on accidental associations. Beelzebub's Tales is a book that destroys existing values. It compels the serious reader to revalue all values, and to a sincere person it is devastating. As Gurdjieff says, it may destroy your relish for your favourite dish, your pet theories, for example, or that form of art you happen to follow. It will be like red pepper, disturbing to your mental and emotional associations, your inertia. For myself, I realise now that for 2 years I tried to use these ideas, tried to assimilate them into my own set of values, hoping to enrich the values without giving them up. I thought that the new ideas would widen the scope and extend the perspective of the old and give variety to the content. But now I feel that the actual framework is becoming valueless. There comes a time to almost everyone in this work when he asks himself, shall I lose the old values that give incentive, and shall I then be able to go on to new ones, ones of a different order? Further on in the book there are implications that the universe is reasonably and intelligently conducted, and that there are many details to be taken care of, that life is not normal on our planet, but that man, by certain efforts, can become normal. Beelzebub has been exiled. What is it in us that has been exiled? We are identified with the solar plexus, with feelings. The solar plexus is a disorganized and disconnected center. One result of continued work would be the concentration of emotion into a definite aim in place of the ups and downs of feeling, of the wasteful struggle of conflicting feelings. Beelzebub constructed an observatory, but only after many attempts and when improvements had been made. We have to work a very long time in ourselves before we can begin to observe ourselves properly. One of the first objections often made to the method and the system is that it is selfish and without love. Jesus said, "Take no thought for yourself." Beelzebub says, "Take thought only for yourself," in the right way, of course, for only then will you be able to take thought for others. There is a saying of Jesus from the Gnostics, "Follow me, and you shall lose me. Follow yourselves, and you shall find both me and yourselves. The Gnostics introduced this method that we are studying into Christianity, but when the Christian leaders of the young church became powerful, they expelled and persecuted the Gnostics. Karnak is an Armenian word and is connected with the Greek idea of the body being the tomb of the soul. Beelzebub's tales are addressed to the dead, asleep in the tomb of the body. The book is of words uttered by I. What is understood in it will be acted upon. There is nothing in the book that I have not known, but as yet I have not woken up and realized it. You know the mantra, more radiant than the sun, purer than the snow, subtler than the ether, is the self within my heart. I am that self am I. We can say that young Hussein represents the self within us. Hussein, the young I. Concerning the systems of spaceships, we can say that Gurdjieff's system is a psychological system which requires active work on the part of the pupil. It replaces the older passive system of faith, love and hope. What is the cylinder? The barrel was hermetically sealed with the seal of Hermes, who taught this method, which is the sly man's way. The denser the substances, the fog and gas of negative emotions, provided you know how to use them, the better the ship goes. In the old religions, one stayed within the church and was carried mechanically to a mechanical heaven. In this system, one has to initiate things for oneself. It is a pilgrim's progress, full of difficulties and struggle, but paradoxically, a quicker and surer way than the easy systems imported into Europe from Asia. Chapter 6, while being a parable, is also a cartoon. In fact, many of the chapters are cartoons in the religious sense. A cartoon here is a picture of an aspect of a man's life on this planet, exaggerated in a certain way in order to draw attention to it, to make one ponder and so arrive at the truth. This is a satire on the various religious cults, sects, rituals, mysteries, systems of breathing, fasting, and so on, all of which profess to give immortality. Rationalism came and cracked them on their noodles, but rationalism is equally negative. Becoming aware of genuine being duty. This is not duty to society or doing one's duty. From one aspect, it is concerned with directing and using our body as a machine, actualizing its potentialities. Our body is a machine with many uses. At present, the psyche uses the body for only a fraction of these. This is immoral. If we habitually work with only one or two centers, we live as one or two brain beings. This is objectively immoral for a potential free brain being. When we begin to ask ourselves, with remorse, like Hussein, how can I pay for my existence and for all that others have done for me? Then we begin to become aware of genuine being duty. Every free brain being, at a certain stage, not necessarily only in this work, asks himself, what is the meaning and aim of existence? What am I here for? Why was I born? How did I come to be born in this particular family, in these conditions? What must I do? Beelzebub tells Hussein not to think about it too much yet. He is still young and must study. Later he will know what to do. We are young in the work and, like Hussein, must study, prepare ourselves, read the book. For the keys to the answers are all there, though, as Gurdjieff says, they are not near the doors. He who is too lazy now to learn all he can will not be able, later, to put his knowledge into practice. To suffer in purgatory is to know and understand what we ought to do, and not yet be able to do it, but remember, zest with ease, and beware of premature exercises. We are the prodigal son, or something in us is. This story, by the way, came from the Gnostics. In the hymn of the robe of glory, the son went to search for a robe which had been stolen, but he fell into mechanical life and forgot his aim. He fell on sleep while tending the swine. He woke and remembered his aim and returned to his father. Gurdjieff says that a perfected man is superior to the angels, the idea being that men, perfected to a certain degree of reason, are cells in the mind of God. Angels are his emotions. One of the tragedies of the cosmos is that men, instead of being under solar influences, are under lunar influences, therefore lunatics. Legend has it that this is the ridiculous or lunatic planet. George Bernard Shaw, who says that this planet is the lunatic asylum of the universe, uses it in this sense. He got it from Lucian, who got it from the Greeks from the Egyptians, and the Egyptians from the ancient Babylonians and the Sumerians. Yet life on the maleficent planet has its compensations. While suffering from the advantage of the terrible disadvantage of being human, we have the possibility of perfecting ourselves and becoming higher than the angels. There is more joy in heaven over one man perfected by his own efforts than in 99 naturally evolved angels. Gurdjieff writes in Beelzebub, quote, "Never will he understand the sufferings of another who has not experienced them himself, though he have divine reason and the nature of a genuine devil." End quote. This has to do with real, not ordinary mechanical suffering. There exist legends in many countries and religions about an accident, a happening unforeseen by the higher powers, which caused a large fragment of the earth to split off and become the moon. Gurdjieff says that there were 2 fragments, and the smaller one became Kimsupai, never allowing one to sleep in peace. In ourselves there are repeated the accidents that happen to the planet. At certain ages, psychological changes occur in us, 2 centres are split off. We must discover in ourselves what these fragments are. We are like the dismembered Osiris. With the help of the method, we can remember ourselves, recollect ourselves, become whole. What is the comet that bumps into us at a certain age? The archangels, Alga Matant and Sakaki, like all other angels and characters mentioned, are personified intelligences comparable to the principalities and powers mentioned in the Bible. There are higher cosmic individuals, the helpers of his endlessnesses in the governing of the universe, in charge of the various solar systems. But apparently they are not all intelligent or all-knowing. Otherwise they would have foreseen the possibilities of a cosmic catastrophe. Only his endlessness is all-wise, all-knowing, all-loving, and his true name, in spite of the 1,000 names of the Hindus and the hundreds of names of the Muslims, can never be known or uttered by ordinary man. We are aware of the moon, whose esoteric name is still Lune de Persia, of whom Powys writes, quote, "That pale traitress, the moon, the cause of all our woes," unquote. But Anulius is unknown to us. If the rationalist, psychologist, artist, writer or filmer feels in himself an ache for perfection, he pays no attention to it, or else dreams that it would be cured by better art, better writing, better living conditions. They have been dreaming of this for thousands of years, and real remorse of conscience that follows a realization of unfulfilled being duty has no meaning for them. The Greek myths alone are full of analogies of a method for self-development, for perfecting oneself, the constant need for conscious labour and voluntary suffering, the labours of Hercules, the quest of the golden fleece, Ulysses, Perseus and the Gorgon, Ariadne and the thread by which one finds the way out of the labyrinth of life, the war of the Greeks and Trojans for Helen. What does Helen represent in this system? And in the Mahabharata too, from whose inspiration the Greeks drew their myths, the ideas are set out far more elaborately. The reading of the book is an exercise in sustained attention, together with imaginative understanding. To understand, an effort must be made with all 3 centres. Fragmentary effort fails to make a whole. How long can I hold my attention? It varies, and one has to take advantage of those periods when one finds one's attention being held by the narrative. Consider the epic quality of the setting of the story. It is a kind of dialogue between Beelzebub, an actualized, ideal, objectively conscious man whose functions has ceased and who has now a critique, who is stating his conclusion impartially, constructively, and without prejudice, and a young, undeveloped being who has a longing to understand. Beelzebub, detached and impartial, surveys and observes the body of the cosmos, as we ought to observe our organism. He implies that the universe has a purpose and that he understands it. Solar systems, planets, beings, the life of man, all organic life has a practical, not a theoretical or mystical function. And the various parts of the megalocosmos, including us men, either fulfill or do not fulfill their function. A question was asked here about Jesus, and Orage said that Jesus studied with schools which included the Essenes. At first he was hailed as a healer, but this was only a minor part of his work. He came to give people, in place of the complicated machinery constructed by the Hebrew priests, a simple method, a system, a ship whose engines had few moving parts, so to speak. Orage continued. The singular life of this planet is the result of an accident. Our moon is a result. It was not developed naturally, as are the scores of other planets, but prematurely delivered. In consequence, a special kind of life had to be organized so that special radiations and vibrations could be developed in order to maintain the moon and annulus. Beings on this planet had to be used for this purpose, but if they realized it, they might refuse to continue their existence. In men an organ was put, Gurdjieff, which had the effect of making them see and sense reality upside down. It was as if something had been radiated into the atmosphere of the planet. As soon as the possibility of danger to cosmic harmony had passed, the organ was removed, but the consequences remained, and men, with few exceptions, have lived in a state of illusion of dream ever since. How do we explain that if we, who consider ourselves intelligent, impartially and sincerely review our behaviour at the end of each day, find that we have behaved like idiots, cowards, poltroons, that we foul our nests wherever we go? Were we to consider another's behaviour thus impartially, we would condemn him as we usually do. Yet for ourselves we remain unmoved and even complacent. We are so complacent, uncritical, that we take it for granted that we are fulfilling our functions, never realizing that we, and life generally, are becoming more mechanical. The problem of why we are as we are, what life is for, what the body is for, what values we live by, never presents itself to us as something to be sensed and pondered over, as it did, for example, to the writer of Genesis, who said, mythologically but intelligently, that the fall, degradation and mechanicality came because of our succumbing to the instinctive centre, the passive denying part. As Beelzebub says, your favourites, unfortunately, know only the denying part. We men were put into the Garden of Eden, and we were expected to take care of the garden. We fell on sleep, ceased to make effort, and were put outside. But since in the beginning we were not entirely to blame, his endlessness, from the time of Adam, sent his messengers one after another, patriarchs, prophets, and teachers, to present a method by which we could wake up and free ourselves from the effects of our mechanicality induced by Gurdjieff. Why is it that we fail to make use of or to preserve the treasures of each succeeding civilization, the science and the art of Egypt, the philosophy and religion of India, the wisdom of Chaldea, the system of personal relations of ancient China? Why is it that we are not the heirs of all the ages? Why this urge to destroy the old? Why, instead of standing on the shoulders of the past, do we have to begin and arrive at a state in many of the arts and sciences inferior to the ancients? Why do we believe and hope in progress, when all around us there are proofs that we are deteriorating and are working day and night to produce forces that would destroy even such as we have built up? The answer is Kundabuffer, our lack of will, our inability to make any effort to work on ourselves. But this is too small a thing for our reformers. The psyche is constantly under the influence of mass suggestions. It is the same in every man, be he white, brown, black, red, or yellow. Take the conception of the word hero. Beelzebub tells the saying that a hero is one who voluntarily undertakes some labour for the benefit of creation. In this sense, Gurdjieff himself is a hero. He spent 30 years tramping through Central Asia, the Near and Far East, enduring incredible hardships in order to satisfy his longing for knowledge and understanding, and to discover and teach a method by which men could perfect themselves. On the planet Earth, until quite recently, a hero was one who most easily fell under the mass psychosis of war and destroyed the lives of many men. The ancients attributed the madness of men in war to gods and devils, in the Mahabharata and the Aeneid, for example. In former times war may have been necessary for nature's purpose, but now, according to Beelzebub, war has become a horror of horrors in the great universe and a hindrance to the divine plan. Now only man and his suggestibility are responsible for the illusion of the pomp and circumstances of glorious war. The first descent occurs in the time of Atlantis. Whether Atlantis ever existed is of no interest to us here, but that Atlantis exists in us is of great psychological interest. Atlantis was buried in the depths of the planet. One of our tasks is to disinter the submerged Atlantis, the buried objective conscience. We ought to continue, while in an intellectual, emotional state, to make an attempt to establish a point of view about the human race. An intellectual attitude is easy, but this alone will not take us very far. It is here today and gone tomorrow. But if we will study something in an intellectual, emotional state and discuss it practically, we shall establish a threefold state in which it will be possible to realize the truth, and this can be lasting. The book is the history of the origin of man and an objective description of him. The facts are not new. They are in us in a state of chaos and disorganization. They are not in our consciousness. As Gurdjieff says, quote, "We do not try to discover something new, but to recover that which is lost." End quote. Some of the parables in the New Testament refer to this. As an exercise, try to imagine in one generalization the 5 main races of man that inhabit the earth. Each has had a history. In what succession did they appear? What are their racial characteristics, their state of evolution and degeneration? What are the objective characteristics common to all as manifested according to the results of the organ Kundabuffer? For example, every man and woman of the 5 great races is possessed of vanity, self-love, self-pride, egoism, etc. Yet there remains in us a certain objective standard, though often buried deep, that regards these characteristics as deplorable. What do we mean by egoism, for example? From one aspect, it is believing that the organism to which I am attached is superior to others, so that I measure others by my likes and dislikes, not by their needs, but by my preferences, and I impudently criticize another for having made a slip while I am guilty of colossal blunders. Egoism is I. You may remember the anecdote in the Conference of the Birds. God one day said to Moses, "Go and get a word of advice from Satan." So Moses went to Iblis and asked for a word of advice. Iblis said, "Always remember this simple axiom, never say I, so that you may never become like me." And vanity, that's something for which we will sacrifice almost anything rather than it should be hurt. And self-pity, which is diabolical, though real pity is divine. These are some of the characteristics which we ourselves share with all men. Why? According to Beelzebub, it is because we are biological products of an abnormal planet. We are normally abnormal. These faults of character are abnormal to real essence. The great religious teachers have not been reformers in the Shavian sense. Shaw never understood Jesus. They have not tried to change or to reform any given culture, but to change the chemistry of the human psyche so that men should think and feel and act normally. At the same time, all great changes which have renewed and vivified the spirit of man, all great art, music, literature, architecture, have come about through small groups of conscious men working according to the inner teachings of the great teachers. All external organized religion of whatever kind has come about through the distortion of the sayings of the great teachers. It is part of the process of downflowing of the law of the octave, which, though conscious in its origin, is mechanical when it reaches us in evolution. Evolution in us is the result of conscious labour and voluntary suffering, of the struggle against this downflowing current. Beelzebub's first descent is on account of a young and inexperienced kinsman of his who got into difficulties with King Apollos. One calls to mind the parallel of Krishna in the Mahabharata. The narrative of the first descent, from one aspect, is a warning against the reformer swayed by feelings, who maintains that, quote, if you trust the people, everything's going to be all right, unquote. The reformer who sees the people labouring and suffering for purposes which have nothing to do with their own needs. He sees certain things clearly, but he thinks he knows what ought to be done, and this is where he goes wrong. Hence, if he succeeds in bringing about a reform in his generation, that reform becomes the abuse of the next. Beelzebub warns Hussein about entertaining certain sentimental notions about the human race. He tells him that those slugs have double natures. In certain moods they talk as if butter would not melt in their mouths. In other moods they act like monsters and do such things to each other as even wild beasts would shrink from. None of the other religions have been responsible for mutual destruction on such an enormous scale as the Christian, and this has done much to discredit the principle of love in the minds of many serious-minded people. Yet the principle of love, in pursuit of real knowledge, is indispensable. All the time people are writing and talking about love, yet they have not a glimmering of real, that is, conscious love. An aphorism in the study house says, practice conscious love on animals first. They are more sensitive and responsive. Beelzebub's descent was from the planet Mars. How do we understand this? Ares, the Greek Mars, was originally the god of games and sports, not of sport as we know it, but of the struggle to train and maintain the body to be of service. In time, as always happens, this idea of Ares degenerated into the symbol of Mars as a god of war and bloodshed. From one aspect, then, we can speak of those on the planet Mars as the Hopi spoke of this kind, as being engaged in divine warfare, divine struggle. We must always keep in mind what Gurdjieff says about Beelzebub's tales. There are 3 versions of the book, an outer, an inner, and an inmost. Also, every complete statement in the book has 7 aspects. From one aspect, then, we must ponder what is said about the observatory on Mars, from which Beelzebub was able to observe impartially and critically the life of man on the earth. We have to learn to adopt this impartial attitude towards our own organism. Orage constantly spoke about not trying to change something in ourselves without instruction from Gurdjieff or one of the older pupils. If we tried to change something without working according to the method, a worse manifestation might appear. He quoted Belloc, "Be sure to keep tight hold of nurse for fear of meeting something worse." Orage said, if the organism becomes swept and garnished by certain pseudo-occult or revivalist methods, if it becomes purged of negative emotions, instead of the emotions being transformed by the use of the method, 7 devils worse than the first may enter. One of the extraordinary things about the method is that by its use, a change to normality is brought about indirectly. Through self-sensing, self-remembering, self-observation, a change is brought about in the organism as a change is made in certain chemicals if a catalyst is present. From another aspect, it is as if 3 children, brothers, were in a room quarrelling and interfering with one another. The door slowly opens and the father looks in. He doesn't do or say anything, just observes. The quarrelling dies down and each child goes on with what he was doing. One of the questions asked in new groups was about increased efficiency. Question: will work in the method improve my writing? Orage: yes. Question: right away? Orage: it is impossible to tell. Certainly it will eventually. Question: but might it prevent my writing for a time? Suppose I cannot afford to wait? Orage: then do not start working in the method. This brought the discussion to what Gurdjieff often said about striving to do everything well. Quote, if you will begin by doing small things well, you will be able to do big things well. You will later be able to work on yourself well. Small things like cooking, washing up, cleaning a floor, but they must be done with attention. Gurdjieff and Orage, when they were teaching, when we were studying high ideas like the laws of the cosmos, were able to bring us down to small everyday things and relate these to high ideas. They never ceased to stress the importance of doing small things consciously, for only then will we be able to understand the smallest thing about great laws. For it is possible to know everything with the formatory apparatus, yet to understand nothing. As the proverb says, with all thy getting, get understanding. Understanding is one of the most difficult things to understand. As Gurdjieff often said, you don't understand what understanding means. In the Conference of the Birds, the Hopi, telling the birds about the third valley, says, after the valley of which I have spoken, there comes another, the valley of understanding, which has neither beginning nor end. No way is equal to this way. Understanding, for each traveller, is enduring, but knowledge is temporary. The soul, like the body, is in a state of progress or decline, and the spiritual way reveals itself only to the degree in which the traveller has overcome his faults and weaknesses, his sleep and his inertia, and each will approach nearer to his aim according to his effort. There are different ways of crossing this valley, and all birds do not fly alike. Understanding can be arrived at variously. Some have found the mihrab, others the idol. When the sun of understanding brightens this road, each receives light according to his merit, and he finds the degree assigned to him in the understanding of truth. When the mystery of the essence of beings reveals itself clearly to him, the furnace of this world becomes a garden of flowers. But it is necessary to have a deep and lasting wish to become as we ought to be in order to cross this difficult valley. As for you who are asleep, how long will you stay as you are, like a donkey without a halter? Attar adds, there is a man in China who gathers stones without ceasing. He sheds abundant tears, and as the tears fall to the ground they change into stones, which again he gathers. If the clouds were to weep tears like these, it would be a matter for sorrow and sighing. Real knowledge becomes the possession of the true seeker, but ordinary knowledge becomes distorted by the formalist mind. It becomes petrified like stones. Someone asked Orage what was the difference between self-improvement and self-perfecting. He said, self-improvement is an arrangement of something that already exists. Self-perfection is an actualization of potentialities not yet developed. As I've said, one of our great disadvantages is that, as men, we learn nothing from the past. Not only do we learn nothing, but education and most of what is called informative writing is in a conspiracy to make us believe that the wisdom of the past, compared to what we know, is only the result, as Gurdjieff says, of, quote, the wiseacrings of ancient barbarians, end quote. Our civilization is not built on preceding civilizations, and science is really a repetition, although it thinks it is discovering things for the first time. Beelzebub refers to at least 2 civilizations preceding historical times in which electrical inventions were carried to as high a point as in our own time. Gurdjieff says that once he took part in an expedition to the Gobi Desert. In one place, 20 yards below the surface, they found the remains of a city. Below that another, and still another. Other archaeologists have found similar conditions on the sites of Troy and Jericho. The people living there today have no tradition or even legends of these lost cities. It makes Egypt seem of yesterday. When I was a boy, we were taught that the great earthworks in England were the remains of Roman camps. It is now being discovered that they are the remains of a civilization, ancient when Rome was young, and that the great stone rings of Avebury are older by thousands of years than Stonehenge. The commonly accepted views of history are the life of man seen through a distorting mirror. Gibbon, in the beginning of his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, says that history is chiefly a record of crime. Today, the scientific attitude has taken the place of the religious attitude. One set of superstitions has replaced another. Scientists are engaged in anatomizing the corpse of the universe. They are concerned with how, not why. Science sees everything mechanically through part of the moving instinct centre. It has no answer to human needs in a crisis. I'm speaking of the ordinary scientist who possesses an assortment of information, of partial knowledge, not verified by personal experience, and which is often disproved by another scientist. Objective science has as its aim the investigation of the meaning and aim of existence, not to discover more and more things, but the truth of the real relation of things. Someone asked, "How would you define superstition?" "Superstition," he replied, "is an emotional attitude towards a lie." Speaking of the chapter on time, Orage said that Gurdjieff's statement, "Time is the unique subjective," was the key to all that had ever been written and said on the subject. Beelzebub says, "Time itself no being can either understand by reason or sense by any outer or inner being function. It is necessary to notice that in the great universe all phenomena without exception, wherever they arise and are manifested, are simply successively law-conformable fractions of some whole phenomenon which has its prime arising on the most holy Sun Absolute, and in consequence all cosmic phenomena, wherever they proceed, have a sense of objectivity, and these law-conforming fractions are actualized in every respect, and even in the sense of their involution and evolution, according to the chief cosmic law, the sacred Heptapara-Pashinok. Only time has no sense of objectivity because it is not the result of the fractioning of any definite cosmic phenomena, and it does not issue from anything, but blends always with everything and becomes self-sufficiently independent, and therefore, in the whole of the universe, it alone can be called and extolled as the ideally unique subjective phenomenon. Time alone, or as it is sometimes called the hieropath, has no source from which its arising should depend, but like divine love, flows always independently by itself, and blends proportionately with all the phenomena in the given place, and in the given arisings of our great universe. "We are like a clock with 3 springs," continued Orage, "which vary according to heredity and early environment. All 3 are wound up to run for 300 or 400 years. Gurdjieff says that in the beginning our organs were made to last 1,500 years. The age of the patriarchs is not just a myth. What prevents our springs from lasting? The answer is the abnormal life of man, his physical life, his emotional life, his intellectual life. The regulator of our clock does not work properly. it begins to go wrong at the age of responsibility. Why does the time of childhood and youth seem so long, and the rest of life seem to go so quickly, to be so short? Time is the potentiality of experience, the number of experiences gained in a given centre. And these experiences can be successive, sequential, or simultaneous. The time of our lives will depend on the rate at which these potential experiences are exhausted. You know the aphorism in the study house? Man has a limited number of experiences. Economizing them, he prolongs his life. Beelzebub speaks of the short duration of life of the beings in a drop of water compared with ours. Similarly, if this room we are in, and we with it, were to shrink to the size of a tennis ball, we would not be aware of it. Perhaps this is what happened to the ants and the bees millions of years ago. Enormous creatures then. They degenerated and became a danger to the cosmic scheme, so nature shrunk them. Time and life today may seem the same to them now as then. It may be that if the degeneration of man continues, if his energy continues to be diverted to trivialities, if scientists continue to invent more fantastic means of destruction, if men continue to pollute and poison the rivers and the earth with chemicals and sprays, then nature may do to them what she did to the ants and bees. As we are, experiences happen to us. We do not and we cannot use them consciously until we learn to control the physical and emotional energy that pours out when we are confronted by sudden, unexpected occurrences. For example, a person reads something in the paper or hears of something, and at once he becomes identified. He feels intensely, and valuable emotional and mental energy is wasted. He has shortened his time. The same with different experiences with people, which may cause us to unwind in a few minutes or hours, years of potential normal unwinding. Time is the infinite, absolute potential of all experience. To a question asked about space being curved, Orage said, "We can understand something of this by studying the work of the law of the octave in ourselves. Since space also obeys the law of the deflection of the lines of force, a line taken from a point in space will eventually come back to itself. Space also must be conceived in octaves and is therefore curved. There are 3 dimensions of space and time: succession, line; simultaneity, plane; seeing 3 or more successions, eternity. Eternity is observing all potentialities of a series simultaneously. Professor Eddington, speaking of himself as a 4-dimensional worm, is on the verge of a concept of 3-dimensional time. Really, he is only 2-dimensional in his concept. The 3rd dimension enters if you see all your past, present and future simultaneously. Gurdjieff calls us sheep. We move in a sort of 1-dimensional line. Recurrence is a sphere. Lines of latitude make circles, an octave of them from the equator, and beings have a longevity corresponding to their latitude of time, those nearest the pole being the shortest. Lines of longitude are spatial. Longitude is reincarnation in space. Latitude is recurrence in time. Without going into a great deal of theory, this cannot now be clear to you. The minds you have now are incapable of grasping these ideas. We aim to develop minds to which these ideas will be as easy relatively as ideas of 2 dimensions are now. Someone asked, "Do you exclude people who apparently can foretell the future or read the past?" Orage: "I never met one who could. When I was an investigator for the Society for Psychical Research, I never saw or heard of an authentic case. Potentialities may be seen, but longitude and latitude cannot be determined for the actualization. Incidentally, I never came across any so-called supernatural phenomena that could not be explained by natural means." One of the aims of Gurdjieff's book is to induce despair in the best trained minds concerning their type of reason. Beelzebub represents the ideal normal man. His function on this planet has ceased. He has the whole of human experience behind him. He has a critique of human nature. He is objective, impartial, unprejudiced. He is indignant, but capable of pity and benevolence. He has made use of his exile to lead a conscious existence, and has spared no effort to actualize his potentialities. He is what we might be. He is what we ought to be. In his talks he presents us with a method by which we may become what we ought to be. Beelzebub sees human beings existing in conditions for which they themselves are responsible, conditions not becoming to free-centered beings. Becoming here means both fitting and that which will enable them to become, to be. Because of the system of education, cognizance of the cosmos in which they live has disappeared from their psyche. As we are aware of the flora and fauna of nature and of the civilization in which we exist, so free-centered beings should be aware of the functions of the cosmos, the sun in relation to the planets, the earth to the moon. This would be being knowledge, that is, direct personal knowledge, not hearsay. A normal free-centered being would understand cosmic phenomena and how he is affected by radiations, emanations, tensions. Being abnormal, we are unaware of this, or we see it distorted. Why? Gurdjieff himself is a mirror to each one of us which reflects reality. The book is this kind of mirror. Kundabuffer is also a mirror, but a distorting mirror in which we see reality upside down. Education is the result of the consequences of the organ Kundabuffer. Plato said that his republic could be set up only if he could begin with newborn children, but since they have to be educated by adults, they would be spoiled. Plato, of course, was the philosopher, while Socrates was the teacher of a method as well as a philosopher. Many people today have intelligence superior to their conduct. They are free from superstition about religion, science, morals, and politics, but continue to be irrational about their children. They see the stupidities of the educational system, yet continue to bring their children up in it. According to Beelzebub, our sun neither lights nor heats. Apart from its psychological implications, what do we know by personal knowledge about the cause of heat and light coming to our planet? Only yesterday, relatively, the whole authority of the Church taught that the sun was a small ball of fire revolving round the earth, created to give us light and heat, and almost everyone believed it. Now scientists teach that the sun is an enormous globe of fire, whose flames shoot thousands of miles into its atmosphere, and almost everyone believes it. How do they know? Beelzebub says that the sun is cold and icy, and that heat and light are the remorse of matter. The sacred A-I-E-I-O-E-I-U-I is the sigh of objective remorse. It is what one should feel in the presence of a being who has developed himself into a higher state of consciousness than one's own, a wish to be what one ought to be. Our planet, the Earth, is the shame of our solar system. It is the ugly duckling, the misshapen dwarf, the beast of the fairy tales in which are enshrined fragments of real teaching, so that it should not be suspected of heretical propaganda. The idea is that if men could become normal, this planet might redeem the solar system. The troubadours, too, taught this idea. They were emissaries of an esoteric school. The whole of the universe exists because of, and is maintained by, the trogo-auto-ego-cratic system, reciprocal feeding. I, myself, eat. I feed on three foods, ordinary food, air, and impressions. We feed on each other. With some people you can say, he or she feeds me. After I've talked with them I feel nourished. Others are vampires. They will suck you dry, if you are foolish enough to let them. The food I eat is changed into substances which become the cells of my body. I am what I have eaten and digested. Literally, I have eaten myself. The universe is a comparable being which eats to live. Every part of the physical universe is a product of the eating of the great I am, which is God. This idea is to be found in myths. The early Christians thought that Jesus cut off parts of his flesh and that his disciples ate and drank his blood. According to Gurdjieff, something like this actually happened. Many rites and ceremonies are connected with this idea, the Holy Communion, for example, and of course distorted. In the rites of cannibalism and in the eating of the sex organs, the source of procreation and virility, we have an example of complete distortion. My body eats. Where then is I? Gurdjieff says that we must learn to distinguish between I and it. What is I? We can offer no evidence for individuality, consciousness and will, the triad or triangle of which I is composed. Yet we can have, in time and with work, a realization of something which is not just organism. The birth of I and its development has been the subject of allegorical teachings in all religions, and it was taught in the mysteries. It plays a great part in the story of Jesus. If one of thine eyes offend thee, pluck it out. If thine eye be single, thy whole body shall be full of light. Be still and know that I am God. I am that I am. I is under the law of 3. It is under the law of 7. If we have a metaphysical background, it is easy to understand much of Gurdjieff's teaching. We should be able to discriminate between the potential and the actual. Read Seurat's 3 Conventions. In speaking of the chapter on art, Orage said that in the time of Pythagoras, artists were talked to while they worked to prevent their being emotionally caught up in their task. He continued, there are 2 categories of art, subjective and objective, unconscious and conscious. Art evokes a range of emotions that nature would, but cannot, produce. The degree to which the artist is conscious in this defines his importance from our point of view. The artist must be in the spirit of nature, in the laws of nature. An understanding of the mathematical principles of nature is not an understanding of the dynamics of nature. The artist's understanding is different from the scientist's description of its tracks. The scientist cannot anticipate nature. The artist should be able to. The subjective artist pursues art for personal development. The aim of the objective artist is to produce a definite and calculated effect on people. His own personal aim may be included in this. Art is a means of communicating emotion. Subjective art satisfies the artist. Objective art affects the recipient as the artist intended. Objective art is based on the understood principles of the law of 7 in architecture, painting and sculpture, music, writing, dancing, drama. Ruskin in his 7 Lamps was on the trowel but became confused. Hokusai said that when he died he hoped to join that group of nature's artists who draw with light and who create flowers. Blake had a vision of true creation. Tiger, tiger, burning bright in the forests of the night, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful symmetry? The modern use of the word creation is out of place. Modern art just happens. We are speaking of the bohemian, the typical subjective artist, expressing himself. Many artists have only aesthetic, not human emotions. We may say, pursue art, pursue reason. True artists are the antennae of nature. Coming nature casts its artist before it. There is an aphorism in the study house, love not art with your feelings. Objective art brings about a state of non-identification. The one great art, so far as this work is concerned, is that of making a complete human being of oneself. In the chapter on the art absurd, Beelzebub says that we make no use of the first and third holy forces. He says, for the coating of their own presences, there are only the crystallizations of the second part of the omnipresent Okidanok, the holy denying. Hence it is that the majority of them remain with presences consisting of the planetary body alone, and thus for themselves are destroyed forever. Has it ever occurred to you that almost all of human activity is concerned not with satisfying the legitimate needs of the planetary body, but with gratifying its desires and weaknesses? Take Wall Street, the Royal Exchange, the shops on Fifth Avenue and Bond Street. Think of the millions who are occupied in making articles to gratify the whims and vanities of women, the millions spent on arms and explosives, on sport, on artificial fertilizers that poison the land, on the drugs devised to relieve the consequent diseases. Think of the thousands of acres of trees cut down every month to make pulp on which the vaporings of journalists and illiterate writers are printed, the energy that goes into the production of aeroplanes and cars. As the tempo of life is speeded up and life becomes more and more complicated, so man has less and less of what is his own. All of this energy and tension, useless for one's being, is taken by nature for her own purposes. One of the great illusions consequent on the organ Kundabuffer is that the pursuit of happiness as an aim in itself is good. If we have a real aim, then we may obtain happiness as a byproduct. Although we may be familiar with theories, we cannot understand anything about the universe until we have established a correspondence in ourselves. Gurdjieff condemns our use of the imagination because we use it chiefly in fantasy. But the book provides an opportunity for making right use of it. One of the exercises in the use of the imagination is that of the frequent shift from the personal to the universal and vice versa. If we understand something of the working of the active, passive and neutralizing forces in ourselves, we can then understand something of the law of 3 in the universe, the same with the law of 7. Have you yet had some realization of the working of these 2 laws, whose processes are going on all the time, in yourselves? If not, it will be only knowledge, and as such may disappear. 96% of our civilization is concerned with the instinctive moving center, the planetary body, 3% with real culture, the emotions, 1% with why, the real mind. The instinctive moving center, which should be the passive part, has, in our civilization, become the active, the positive. We are the inverted man, crucified, upside down. Pythagoras taught this system and method, but no record of his teaching remains except some fragments from perhaps one of his subsidiary groups. The books written about him are almost all supposition, but his teachings had an enormous influence. Plato's Timaeus contains the cosmogony of Pythagoras. Some of Gurdjieff's dances and movements are based on the fragments of Pythagoras' teaching. The initiation of the priestess, a fragment of a mystery, for example. When Aristotle began the sections of his book on metaphysics, he meant to discuss space, time, thought, and force in the light of the teaching he had received from Pythagoras, but it seems that he never got on with it.